Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming and thank you for the introduction. So yes, I'm Lisa, I'm the Monitoring Evaluation Learning Advisor at Amplio, which is a nonprofit just about 3 hours down the road in Seattle. And I wanted to speak today about some work that we're doing to sort out a way to amplify the perspective of program participants in our projects. The work that I'm presenting is certainly a team effort with Amplio, so I want to recognize Tofik Dapala and Guma Tia, who are sitting in our Amplio Ghana office and weren't able to travel for this particular event, but certainly the work that I will be presenting is credited to them. So I'm going to focus mostly on impact assessment methodologies and some different methods that we're undertaking, but I wanted to ground that conversation in a project that we recently implemented in the Upper West region of Ghana. And that project was implemented in partnership with Ghana Health Service, UNICEF, and Amplio, and it ran from 2019 to 2021. So the project was working with community health workers in the rural healthcare system, and we were really aiming to strengthen community members' access to accurate, consistent, and engaging education materials, and that was relating to health, WASH, and child protection topics. The project also hoped to generate demand for essential services in community health centers in the rural healthcare system, and to strengthen the community health volunteers and nurses that are delivering the healthcare services in these rural areas. So you'll see a photo of a community health nurse who is working with community members to do an education campaign in this Upper West region of Ghana. So the project took an SBCC approach, a social behavior change communication approach, meaning that the project was aiming to have social impact through effective communication methods and materials that were delivered in these communities. And to deliver those messages, the project decided to use the talking book. And the talking book is produced by Amplio, and there's a photo of it here on the screen. The talking book is a portable, rugged audio device that was designed to help bridge the gap with illiterate or low literate populations. So on the talking book, it can store hours of content, it collects statistics, and people can also record messages on the talking book. It was designed as an equitable and neutral technology, so as I'm sure everyone here knows, there's a great gender digital divide, and women have less access to internet, cell phones throughout the world, and so that means that they have access to less information. So the talking book also helps bridge that kind of gender divide. So a little bit about the device here. So you'll see that the front of it is designed with these icons that can be kind of interpreted across languages, again, for low literate populations. The device itself was designed in collaboration with communities. There's a speaker where you would hear the communication material. There's a microphone where someone can leave a message, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And there's a USB port, which is how the device is charged, and then also how materials, like the content that's on the talking book, is put on the talking book, and then also the statistics, how those are kind of aggregated into our database. So with that in mind and how the project was kind of running, that's where this impact assessment comes. So we designed the impact assessment to look at essentially, is this device helping the community health volunteers be more impactful? Are they seeing improvements in health outcomes? And in particular, is this device a scalable and efficient method for strengthening the healthcare system? So when it comes to designing impact assessments, as I'm sure everyone in this room is aware, there are barriers. And we for this particular project, decided to kind of identify those barriers at the beginning and try to design the impact assessment to account for those barriers or kind of counteract those barriers. So in international development, obviously there's a lot of power dynamics with donors and NGOs coming into a marginalized community that we wanted to really consider for the impact assessment. gender norms, language barriers, in particular, limited resources. So again, it's a charity. We couldn't be traveling back and forth or reaching this very remote area regularly to be talking to program participants. And then this image, I think, really described like most of the conversations we were having. It was that there's all this kind of chaos in the project and different opinions and different perspectives. And what often happens with impact assessments is that all gets funneled through like a log frame, an indicator tracking table, a set number of indicators, and it pops out a report, and that is perfect, but you lose some of the like nuance and beauty of the chaos, right? And so we wanted to really figure out a way to identify and capture those emergent themes that you might lose in a traditional impact assessment methodology. And that's where participation came in. We really wanted to emphasize how do we get participation of community members into the impact assessment? How do we emphasize that in our design? So we identified 4 data sources for the impact assessment. The first 3 are really what you would consider kind of traditional, conventional impact assessment methods. So usage statistics are the statistics that the talking book actually captures, things like this message was listened to the most, or, you know, on average, the talking book was played 4 hours a day, things like that, that kind of tell you just how were people engaging with the materials. And then we ran regular surveys with the community health workers and then also with the households. Now, then we had this component of user feedback, and that's really where we wanted to capture these emergent themes and build participation from the community into the impact assessment. So talking book user feedback, let me just orient you to that. So on the device, you can press a button and record a message in your local language, really. It's just kind of a recording device. And those recordings are then stored on the device and stay in the community until we plug that device into either a smartphone or a laptop, at which point the data goes to our database. All those recordings go to the database, and then the project team can start interacting with that information. So we see people recording messages on the talking book in a variety of different ways. We talk about prompted and unprompted user feedback. So people can just pick up the talking book and leave a message, anything that they want to say on the device. Also, we can build some prompts into the messages that are on the talking book. So let's say a project has a message on hand washing behavior, and at the end, the speaker could say, you know, we're interested in your thoughts on this, or what are your barriers to washing hands regularly? And that would be prompted user feedback because it would direct the person to then record their thoughts onto the device. Now, they have the device either at home, in a community health center, in a school, or kind of in a group session, like in this photo where there's a community health worker who's interacting with a mother's group, and she's actually using the talking book to facilitate discussion and then like record the feedback that the community members are giving there. Okay, so we put the talking books out into the field, we encouraged this user feedback, and at the end of the day, we ended up with about 1,200 user feedback recordings that were gathered in just the span of about 6 months. And so then it came to the point of, okay, how do we process all of this information and what do we do with all of these recordings? So just as an example, if you're interested in like what kind of things are people saying on this recording device, these are 3 transcriptions from the project of different messages that people left. So you'll see one is about someone kind of questioning why pregnant women need to visit the hospital regularly, and in particular the costs associated with all these visits. Then there's a message about, you know, how teachers within the local school are actually sending learners off to work in the teacher's farm rather than teaching them. So some kind of corporal punishment and like systematic issues there. And then the last one that's highlighted is challenging some of the messages that were on the talking book. So there were some child protection messages that focused on preventing child marriage for girls under the age of 18. But this particular speaker was saying, why aren't you also talking about boys? They're also getting married under the age of 18. So if you can kind of imagine all of these different messages, over 1,200 of them, what do we do with that? And so keep in mind that these are local language messages. So it's not as if I could sit there and listen to them. We had to work with like local speakers to sort through all these messages and kind of process them to make sure that the data was feeding into the impact assessment and more importantly into the program design. So we tried some traditional methods like in vivo or QDA minor, deduce, all of those. We found that was too kind of cumbersome for audio messages, and also very cumbersome for like local language speakers that are trying to navigate these complex software systems. So we developed what we're calling the user feedback processing system, and this is a screenshot of it here. You'll see that, well, first of all, it's a web-based application. So an analyst would open their computer, log in under their username and password, then have access to all of the user feedback recordings that were made within their project. And the top section here kind of describes how many messages were received on the talking book for your program and how many have been analyzed and then how many still have to be analyzed. So that's kind of their count or their ticker that they can watch as they go through the messages. And then the system randomly selects one of those messages for the analyst to process. And you'll see that's the audio player there. There is a button in red that says mark as not feedback. You can imagine with these out in the field for a significant amount of time. We have kids singing, we have background noise, lots of different recordings. So if the message isn't really relevant to the program or really user feedback, you can just click mark as not feedback. That message is marked as analyzed, and then a new message appears within the system. Okay, so if the message is in fact user feedback, then the analyst is guided through some questions to kind of think through, okay, what are the key takeaways of this user feedback message? How do we put this to use, and what can we learn from this? So kind of a structured questionnaire that helps them reflect on the message that they just listened to and process that to get through 1,200 messages or so. So they will complete this form, and then that syncs with our Tableau dashboard, which kind of compiles all of that data and all of that processing and identifies these emergent trends so that program staff can interact with the data, identify those trends, act upon them, and ultimately it can feed into the impact assessment as well. So, lessons learned through this process. We found that this system of having this kind of separate device that someone can provide feedback on overcame some of the challenges and barriers that we've traditionally faced with impact assessments. So we were able to overcome some issues with gender discrimination, language, geography. All of a sudden we had access to community members that we probably never would have had access to previously to hear their perspective. We were able to identify emergent themes that kind of broke us out of the traditional impact assessment framework, this like rigid framework that, you know, we didn't know the right question to ask to get the interesting information. All of a sudden we had this open door for people to really like give their perspective on anything that that was on their mind and things that they were living through and experiencing. And then finally, we also learned that processing large amounts of qualitative data is difficult, right? The processing tool worked, but it's also not perfect. So we're continuing to evolve that. So building upon that, we're kind of internally debating a couple of things with this new system. One thing is that, you know, we started this emphasis on user feedback to break away from frameworks and like structured kind of reporting, and then we kind of put another survey on top of that. And so we're grappling with this idea of, you know, did we just put another framework on top of qualitative data, and are we losing information in that? We're also looking at how artificial intelligence and or voice recognition could be used, in particular for more common languages, and help us process these messages more quickly. The visualization of qualitative data can be this ongoing challenge that I don't know if anyone has quite solved. So we're continually trying to work through how do we present all of this information well and like not lose what makes it so beneficial. The image on the slide here is a qualitative chart chooser that PAC developed, which is really, really helpful. It's a great resource to look at how can you kind of aggregate this qualitative information and present it visually, which we're using to inform the dashboard design. And then finally, we're also exploring more intentional work with the analysts, so the people who are sitting in a country and listening to these messages in local language. They are obviously a wealth of information, and so we're trying to figure out how do we better bring them into the impact assessment to help us identify some of those trends that maybe we are losing in the processing system. Okay, so thank you. I will encourage you to certainly, well, I think we're going into questions, but also you can reach out to me if you want to demonstrate a demo of any of this. Love to talk more about it.